Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm just got a quick one for you. I am going to show you how it is I create my custom brushes. Please excuse the gaps if I'm speaking. I'm trying to finish my cup of tea before it goes cold. Right, so we are in Artrage 5 today, and as most of you know, and those of you that have used it before, you know what the custom brush symbol looks like. If you haven't used custom brushes before, I highly recommend giving it a go. When I have worked out how to do it, I will put the wet watercolor brush that I'm going to be showing you how to make today up on my Patreon, and it will be up on my free section, so you can go there to grab it and get a brush for free. Right, so what we are going to do is we're going to look at two things. Let us go to settings, and as you can see here, I've got a custom brush already built. This is a wet watercolor brush. You can see how that is there. Ignore that, it's just the husband making sure I'm still alive. I've left him going to get shopping. Well, not shopping, but actually I've sent him to get some glue. Right, so you can see this is the basically what we will be looking to make. So, what we need to do is we want to create a new preset. We want it in this, you can go up here and create a new group if you want. I've already got a new group created. So this time we're going to create a new group, and we're going to call this brush demo, and hit OK. So now the group says brush demo, and we're going to give the brush a name. Should we give the brush a name? Probably should give it brush demo 1. We want to add it to a toolbox, but we don't want to store the colour or size. We want to go to brush designer. And right. So, when you're in brush designer, you've got a whole load of things, first things you need to do. So what we are going to look at actually no. One of the things I realised quite quickly about Artrage is often if you create the brush and preset first and then change these settings, notice it goes back to the word presets at the top and it comes out of your brush settings. When you then hit OK, it basically creates a new preset brush, but not to the one that you created, and that can be an absolute right royal pain in the ass. So I found the easiest way to make sure that you don't lose your settings constantly is to actually start with a blank preset brush. So you can skip using one from settings, you can go straight to brush designer and just fiddle with this until it drops back to preset, and then you can do what you want. So what we're going to do with this, you can see what it's doing there, we don't want to do that. Brush designer, default settings, right. So these are the default settings you'll see: head and grain. Preset, and obviously where you want to put it, where you're pulling it from. In this case it's just a blank preset. Clear, because obviously you want to test your brush out, this is where you see it, hit clear. Colour and size of brush, so you can experiment with how it looks. Mostly effective with size really rather than colour, and obviously all the different aspects of the brush that you can change to what we're doing. Now, before I go into the next part, I am going to jump over to GIMP. We are going to be creating a watercolour brush today, and to do that I need a head. So basically it's like if you took the tip of your paintbrush and touched it down like you were making a stamp straight onto the painting, straight onto a piece of paper, that stamp outline of what the end of your brush looks like is basically what the head image is supposed to be. Grain is then basically how much of that head picks up texture from the paper and what that texture should be. So we will play with both. In this case, I'm going to show you how I created the head in this one. I am using a program called GIMP, so this is GIMP, and what I want to do is I'm going to drag and drop an image. Now these that you can see here are some scanned in just blobs of watercolour that I've done on a piece of paper. The head that I was creating from for the brush that I'm going to be showing you is this piece here. So I'm just going to drag and drop this into GIMP. Ta-da! One piece of watercolour. And then I am going to go to Colours, Hue and Chroma, and I'm going to take the chroma down so that it's grey and black and white, so it loses all tone. And I'm going to put the lightness down to minus 100%, so it gives us basically a black and white image. So that gives us what we need for our head. A head is taken basically from black or white pixels. You can invert it, and you'll see once I've done this that I will need to invert it in Artrage in order for it to work. I will show you the effect of both so you can see it inverted and uninverted. So I am going to export that. I'm just going to stick it on desktop, and we are going to call it, what are we going to call it? Watercolor Head 1 Demo. Yeah, because that's really long-winded. Remember the dot, otherwise it won't save the file type. Export that out. Bing. Right, that's that done. So back to Artrage. Now, here's your head section. We're going to go to head, and we're going to load brush head. And we're going to scroll through the various junk that's on my desktop. Ignore the various pictures of cats. And here is the image we created earlier. So we're going to open that. As the first thing you see, note that Artrage has basically taken the negative and positive form of the brush head in the opposite to what I actually had in the PNG file. I have actually no idea why it does this. It's quite irritating because it just means you have to invert it. You see this little arrow next to the word head? Click on the arrow and hit invert. And then you get your brush head. If I go back, you can see that you've got the white area and the black area. The black area is where the paint will be, and the white area is where your paint won't be. So if I stamp that down on the page, you can see that my blue paint is around the image of what I want my head of the brush to be. So brush wise, it's almost like I've taken a flat square chisel head paintbrush and maybe accidentally hacked at it with a pair of scissors. So let's clear that, and then I'm going to go back to invert my head so that now the black area is actually the shape of the brush that I want. And now if I stamp that down, you can see that that's now my brush head. So now if I paint, pull that across the page, you can see what's happening there. Doesn't look so good at the moment, but there's more to this than meets the eye. Right, then we need some grain. You don't always have to have grain, because obviously like this, you can see that all the white speckles in part of the head will cause its own kind of grain effect. If I improve this to 100%, you can see them there. So obviously that does create grain, but often not, it's nice to actually have some. You can create your own grain. You can Google images of texture and then convert them in a program like GIMP back to black and white so that you've got your high contrast colours to create your grain from. If you go into the collection, you can see there's not really anything in here. I'm not really sure, because I know that there are grains because obviously they use them, but for some odd reason they're not visible in here, which is a bit weird. But for the sake of this, I am just going to use the watercolor one, which is like a soft blob. I suppose blob is probably the best word we're going to use for this. We're going to use a soft blob as our grain. Now if I pull this brush across the paper again, you can see it's not really made that much of a difference. Right, now here's where we're going to get funky. We're not going to use any of these tools, and we're not going to use any of these tools. No, I tell a lie. We will be using pick up colour, but I will explain that in a minute. The only ones we really want to be looking at are these ones specifically. Now, the dab spacing is in reference to what happens between each time the brush head touches the paper. So if I clicked once here and then moved all the way over here and clicked again, the distance between that one and that one is called dab space. The dab is you touching the paper with the brush, and the spacing is the space in between. So you can see here, if I do this, this is the effect we get at the moment. Let's clear that. If I bring dab spacing to 0, you get no space between them at all. So as I drag the brush head across the paper, there's no spacing between each dab of the brush head. So it's more like dragging the brush head across the paper. Which, if you were in real life, yes, that would probably be exactly what you're doing. As you can see though, for this, you end up with this quite blurry edge, which would be good for really, really heavy paint, but that's not the effect we're going for. On the other end of the scale, 100% spacing, as I pull the brush across, you can see that that's the 100% spacing as I drag my mouse around. If we set it to 50, that's what we get. So it's still not looking much like a watercolour brush at the moment. So this is where we get some fun. The other thing we want to do is we want to have a look at rotation jitter. Now, dab jitter basically affects the time between each dab space. So whereas I can go dab, 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 and the spacing between each one time-wise is even. So for example, 50%, notice that it's exactly the same spacing between each one as I drag it across. If I increase the dab jitter, let's take it to 31, dab jitter basically makes that dab spacing random. So now watch what happens when I drag this across. Dab, 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 dab. And also its placement as well. So you no longer get this evenness, it kind of spreads it out a bit. But it is starting to look a lot more like watercolour. So let's clear that. Right, dab opacity is fairly obvious. As you can see, we have a large amount of opacity on this. So when I click once, that's the dab opacity at 25%. Unlike a lot of programs where it's done the opposite way around, so it goes from left to right, this one goes right to left in opacity, so going to 0 gives you absolutely nothing, means it's full opacity. Does that make sense? Full opacity at 0? Don't ask. 100% opacity, which does make sense if you think about it, and there you go. There's our brush. Now watercolour is pretty opaque, which is why I had it set to around about the 20s. And obviously the idea of watercolour is that the more you layer, the stronger the colour. So we really don't want anything kind of lower than 20 or higher than about 30. So we're going to set this to, should we leave it at 21? Yeah, we'll leave it at 21 for now. We may want to lower that maybe a touch depending on what we're going to be doing. Dab spacing, we need to sort that out. It's at the moment for a nice looking brush stroke, it's a little too long. Also, the dab jitter is going to possibly cause problems with the general outline shape. So it would be no good if you made the brush smaller and tried to make a straight line with it, because this waviness that you get from the jitter means you wouldn't be able to do a straight line. So we're actually going to remove dab jitter. We don't need it in this brush. Clear that, and I get this straight line again. Perfect. Right, rotation jitter. This I do want to play with, and the reason for that is because when you work with a brush, obviously you use the tilt of the stylus in order to be able to gain and control the direction. However, this brush head specifically has a direction. Obviously, it goes from top left to bottom right. It is a diagonal based brush head. Because of that, when you draw with it, you end up with this very weird shape. In order to get rid of that, we need to increase the rotation jitter. Rotation jitter will basically rotate the brush head for every dab you make. With me so far? I hope so. So I'm going to increase the rotation jitter to 100%. Now watch what happens. See that? I'm getting almost more of a line because it is turning on rotation the brush head as I move. Do it once again. There we go. So we're getting more that looks like a brush stroke rather than just dabbing a brush head across your page in a line. So now it's looking more like a brush stroke. To make it more like a proper brush stroke, we need to decrease the dab spacing, because at the moment they are overlapping, and where they're overlapping we're getting this beautiful pattern. But we need this to be a lot closer together so that it looks more like a cohesive brush stroke rather than dabbing the head onto the paper, more like dragging the brush across the paper. So to do that, we obviously need to reduce our dab spacing. So we're going to reduce our dab spacing. We'll sit it at 15% and see what we get. Clear that. So this is what we now get. With me so far? Let's do it again. I'm also going to reduce the size of the brush so we can get a closer look at what we're doing. Right. So as you can see, now that we've reduced the dab space, with it being a lot closer together, we're now forming a nice brush. So we're now actually getting a brush stroke, so we're actually now getting paint, and we're getting this weird pale bleed pattern around the outside edges, which is basically caused by the rotation of the brush head going round every time you move. Let's decrease the dab spacing a bit more, and now we've got this softer edge, more like a bleed with the heavier paint in the middle. Okay, so we're getting a bit closer. Still not happy with the opacity. The opacity in this is probably just not enough. So we're going to bring the opacity down to 10%. And now we've got this lovely patterned brush stroke, which is really, really pretty. And it has this beautiful feathered edge, just like if you had too much water on the brush and it's bleeding out on the paper. It's still a little heavy because of the amount of times the head is being dabbed in the same place. So I want to try something. Right, let's set our rotation to 50 and try that. See, now we're getting a slight distortion in the pattern. It's very heavily pointy on one side and rounded on the other. We don't really want to be doing that. So we'll keep the rotation at 100%. I think that'll help. We'll just bring the spacing up just a tad. And that's a lot. Definitely not as dark, but the pattern's just as nice. So I mean, as we go around, you can see almost slightly marbled. Right. Grain size. Now the grain size is the size of the grain pulled from the grain pattern. Yep, I know. Couldn't get more complicated if you tried. I'll show you the difference though between if we set the grain 0 and then you see. As you set the grain to 0, you see something very, very interesting happening. Now, I often set the grain to 0 on a lot of my brushes, and the reason for that is because the paper you're going to be working on, believe it or not, you set a paper texture in Artrage, and you want to be able to see that paper texture through the brush that you're using, which is great. However, if you are using a brush that comes with a heavy grain on it, you lose the texture of the paper. As you can see here, as I pull this down and come back up, you can start to see these lines just here. And these, you can just see them here as well, these lines going up and down. That's the texture of the paper in the brush designer, so you can see the texture of the paper. Because I've got the grain size set to 0, you can see the grain of the paper through the brush head, which is beautiful. And look at what it's done to the brush. It's now almost a lot more spreading out on the paper as I put it down, because it's following and flowing into the grain. Now I'm going to go the other way and show you what happened when we set the grain size to 100%. So here's our grain size back at 100%, and we go back to this very, very forced image of the head, and you can see straight away it's a lot more, the actual pattern of the head is a lot more prominent, and it's a lot more almost grainy in texture as well. And that's because each grain that forms the head is now 100% bigger than when we had it earlier, and therefore it's a lot more visible every time we put the brush down. If I clear that, change that to 100%, you can see it here. Almost looks like I'm painting on top of sanded paper, which is lovely. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a lovely texture, but it's not what we want. And when you're working with watercolour, you do really want this beautiful, almost light, soft effect, because that's the sort of thing you can get with watercolours. You can get this beautiful, soft, almost romantic effect and style with watercolour brushes that you can't get with things like pastel. It's very hard to do without blending your pastel down and smoothing it out and softening the edges. When you do that with pastel, you risk making it muddy, and as soon as you make it muddy, you lose all definition, you lose the vibrancy of your colour, and you also lose the opacity, because pastels actually are opaque. They are transparent, you can see through them, but the minute you start rubbing them and combining them, you end up with this grey, muddy colour, and you lose the opacity as well, so you lose your layering. So back to 0 on our grain size, and we've got this beautiful, beautiful brush. So I don't want to do any more to the brush. This is exactly how I want it. I'm now going to save this though, so that I've now got what I want. So I'm going to go to here, save this as a new preset, and I want to add this to my brush demo. I'm going to call this demo brush 3. I'm going to add it to the toolbox so it appears up in the toolbox up here. And from the list, I'm not going to store colour, and I'm not going to store size, and the reason for that is because you want to be able to change the colour and the size of the brush without it jumping back to a new, for the brush design to jump back to a new preset, because as soon as it does that, it defaults back to the original head, which is, I believe it's an airbrush style head, so you don't want to lose all the work you've done. Up here, where it says preview image, I'm going to load a preview image. Now, this is something a lot of people weren't aware of. You just assumed that this was the image you had to go. So I'm going to pick a random image. The ones that I've done and that will be up on Patreon for free will be, it will have my name and logo on, so you'll be able to pick them up. It also means that they're easier to find once you've installed them into Artrage. So let's just pick an image. So now we've got an image, it's in the group we want it to be, it's got a name, and we're going to hit save. Okay, done. Right, now, presets, brush demo, demo brush 3. And then we're going to do this, and there's our brush. So, what can we do with it? What can we do? Apart from loving the texture, let's have a bit of a play. I'm really into clouds and sky at the moment, don't ask. I'm not actually sure why. Okay. Overlap that. This is a perfect brush for clouds. If you're obsessed with clouds like I am, this is a really great brush for clouds. There we go. Now, one of the things I was asked recently, specifically about this brush, was, well, what if I want to give it more definition? Well, actually, there's an easy answer to that, and the answer to that is make the brush smaller. Not everything has to have a straight line, so straight away that I can do a lot more and give it a lot more definition just by changing the size of the brush. On this brush in particular, the bigger the brush size on it, the softer the look it's going to be, and it's just such a lovely effect. So yeah, no, I'm making a real hash out of these clouds. It's not intentional, it's just having some fun. Right, anyway, I'm going to leave it at that with you guys today. I hope you've really enjoyed this demo and instruction. Have a go yourselves. See if you can rebuild this brush. Obviously, you don't have the image file that I've used to create the head, but just create your own. Use a brush in GIMP. Say, do it in black and white. In fact, I'll just show you that quickly now. Let's get rid of that. What brush, oil brush. Oil brush presets. I need something. Dry clumps. Oh, dry clump will do. Whoa, let's make this considerably bigger. Let's do it at 500. Yeah, okay, maybe not dry clumps. What else have I got? Thin and dry? No. What have I got I can use? What have I got? Tiny dabs? Oh, that'll do. Okay. But my tiny dabs need to be considerably bigger. Right. So let's we'll have a good play at this, right? Set your thing to black. Have a clean surface. Don't use any texture paper or anything. Just have it as is. Take brush, make your marks. That's not going to help. Where's my settings? Full loading, full pressure. Ooh, that's better. Still not exactly black. Why? Auto clean. Square head, that might help. Stiffness. Oh, look at that. Now that we can use. Thinners, right. Thinners, that's what's causing the problem. Right, so there is... Why am I doing it that way? Let's do it that way. There we go. Right, there you go. Straight away, I've taken the brush, I've applied it to canvas, and I've created this beautiful black and white image, which I can use as a brush head. If you go to File, Export Image File, and save it as a PNG, you can then use that file to upload and use that as your brush head. So straight away, you've got your own ability to create your own brush heads within Artrage and then import them back into Artrage as your brush head once you've saved them out as a PNG. Hope that makes sense. Anyway, I really do have to go. I've been on here for a little bit longer than I'm supposed to be. I was going to make this short, but I hope you guys don't mind. Let me know if you've got any questions. Feel free to drop a comment in the box below. Remember to like and subscribe, and enjoy the rest of your evening, and I'll see you in the next video. Ta-ta for now.